Hey y'all. Hey y'all. I'm about to. Okay. Okay. So we're on a little bit later because I cooked a movie today. So period. So remember yesterday I was like, we already read this, blah 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 blah. So then I looked at the book, the 90, like read the Bible in 90 days book, and it was like 12 pages a day. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure we kind of read 12 pages a day too. So I'm like, I'm sure that it's the same amount of reading. The pages are really just full because if you look at my Bible, like these are full pages, but we have pages that are like this too, where like it's like other writing here and then the Bible's on the bottom. So I'm like, you know what, we're just gonna thug it out. We're gonna thug it out, we're gonna thug it out, we're gonna get it together. Oh, I left my journal. Give me a second. Give me 1 second. Okay. Ooh. Okay. So we're gonna thug it out, we're gonna get it together. If we do have things like days that we've already read it, I'm probably just gonna either read in my head or we'll just skip over it. But because we're so behind, we'll probably just skip over it or I'll skim through, make sure there's nothing that like there's something else I want to talk about, you know. So anyway, let's see where we left off. Yesterday we're supposed to do day 32. I'm just gonna write in here repeat. Reading. Because literally it was like the exact same. But when we go into like studying the Bible, like really studying it, we'll read through it so that we can compare. So today is going to be day 33. And day 33 is 2 Chronicles 24 through 35. And since I'm going to be working from home today, I really think that I'll be able to do like 3 readings today. I want to do one right now. I have a meeting at 10. Then I want to do one at like 12. And then I have basketball today. Then I want to come home and do another one. But when I be at home, I don't get as tired because it's not as much people interaction. So hopefully that'll help me want to, do that. So we're just gonna go back and compare for a second. Because I remember us reading about Hezekiah and how he was like the bomb.com. I don't know if we went into like detail. I don't know if we went into like great detail about it. So Okay. So this is talk about David. Oh, David, the Levites, the Merarites, the death of David, Second Chronicles of preparation, Solomon built the temple, Solomon's prayer dedication, other activities, Sheba visits, Solomon's death. Boom. Okay. Asa's reform. Asa's last years. Hezekiah, the king of Judah. What about that? Amaziah, Uzziah, the king of Judah. Jotham, king of Judah. Okay, this is what we're going to start off at. We are going to start off at we're going to start off with Hezekiah. Yep. So we're going to start at 29, actually. We're not going to start at 24 because I definitely know that we read Amaziah the king, Uzziah the king, and it's really just, yeah, we already read about this. So we're going to start at 29, especially because Hezekiah is a good one. Real good one. So we're going to start at 29. Okay. I'm going to have to, let me type right here. Yep. Oh, maybe I should just put that in the thing. Whatever. I'll just put that in the description. Let's skip to 720. Skip to 720. Okay, so 29. Hezekiah purifies the temple. Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king. He reigned in Jerusalem for 29 years. His mother was Abijah, the daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and just as his father David had done. In the first month of the year of his reign, he opened the door of the temple of the Lord and repaired them. He brought in the priests and the Levites and assembled them in the square on the east side and said, "Listen to me, Levites, consecrate yourselves now and consecrate the temple of the Lord, the God of your fathers. Remove all defilement from the sanctuary. Our fathers were unfaithful, and they did evil in the eyes of the Lord our God and forsook him, and they turned their faces away from the Lord, dwelling in the place, and turned their backs on him. They also shut the doors of the portico and put out the lamps. They did not burn incense or present any burnt offerings at the sanctuary of the God of Israel. Therefore, the anger of the Lord has fallen on Judah and Jerusalem. He has made them an object of dread and horror and scorn, as you can see with your own eyes. This is why our fathers have fallen by the sword, and why our sons and daughters and our wives are in captivity. Now I intend to make a covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, that his fierce anger will turn away from us. My sons, do not be negligent, for the Lord has chosen you to stand before him and serve him, to minister before him and to burn incense." So then it says who the Levites, then these Levites set to work. It says the Kohathites, Mahath, the son of Amasai, Joel, the son of Azariah. And then it goes and just says the Merarites, the Gershonites, the descendants of Elizaphan, and the descendants of Asaph, and the descendants of Heman, and the descendants of Jeduthun. When they had assembled their brothers and consecrated themselves, they went in to purify the temple of the Lord, and the king had ordered, following the word of the Lord. The priests went to the sanctuary of the Lord to purify it. They brought out the country yard. They brought out the courtyard of the Lord's temple, everything unclean that was found in the temple of the Lord. The Levites took it and carried it out to Kidron Valley. They began the consecration on the first day of the first month, and by the 8th day of the month, they reached the portico of the Lord. For 8 more days, they consecrated the temple of the Lord itself, finishing on the 16th day of the first month. Then they went into King Hezekiah and reported, "We have purified the entire temple of the Lord, the altar of burnt offerings with all of its utensils, the table for the setting of the consecrated bread with all its articles. We have prepared and consecrated all the articles that King Ahaz removed from his unfaithfulness while he was king. They are now in front of the Lord's altar." Early the next morning, King Hezekiah gathered in the city's officials together and went up to the temple of the Lord. They brought 7 bulls, 7 rams, 7 male lambs, and 7 male goats as a sin offering for the kingdom for the sanctuary of Judah. He commanded the priests, the descendants of Aaron, to offer these on the altar of the Lord. So they slaughtered the bulls, the priests took the blood and sprinkled it on the altar. The goats for the sin offering were brought before the king, and the assembly they laid their hands on them. The priests then slaughtered the goats and presented their blood on the altar for a sin offering to atone for all Israel, because the king had ordered the burnt offering and the sin offering for all Israel. He stationed the Levites in the temple of the Lord with cymbals, harps, and lyres in the way prescribed by David and Gad the king's seer and Nathan the prophet. This was commanded by the Lord through the prophets. So the Levites stood ready for David's instruments and the priests with their trumpets. Hezekiah gave order to sacrifice burnt offering on the altar. As the offering began singing, the Lord began already accompanied with trumpets and instruments of David, the king of Israel. The whole assembly bowed in worship while the singers sang and the trumpeters played. All this continued until the sacrifice of the burnt offering was completed. When the offerings were finished, the king and everyone present with him knelt down and worshipped. King Hezekiah and his officials ordered the Levites to praise the Lord with the words of David and the psalmist here. So they sang praises with gladness and bowed their heads in worship. Then Hezekiah said, "You have now dedicated yourselves to the Lord. Come and bring sacrifices and thanks offerings to the temple of the Lord." So the assembly brought sacrifices and thank offerings, and all whose hearts were willing brought burnt offerings. The number of burnt offerings the assembly brought was 70 bulls, 100 rams, and 200 male lambs, all of them for burnt offerings to the Lord. These animals consecrated as sacrifices among 600 bulls, 3,000 sheep and goats. The priests, however, were too few to skin all the burnt offerings, so their kinsmen, the Levites, helped them until the task was finished and until other priests had been consecrated. But the Levites had been more conscientious in consecrating themselves than the priests had been. There were more burnt offerings in abundance, together with the fat of the fellowship offerings and the drink offerings that accompanied the burnt offerings. So the service of the temple of the Lord was reestablished. Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced at what God had brought about for his people, because it was done so quickly. Hezekiah sent word to all, number 30. Hezekiah sent word to all of Israel and Judah, and also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, inviting them to come to the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover to the Lord, the God of Israel. The king and his officials of the whole assembly in Jerusalem decided to celebrate the Passover in the 2nd month. They had not been able to celebrate it at the regular time because not enough priests had consecrated themselves and the people had not assembled in Jerusalem. The plan seemed right both to the king and the whole assembly. They decided to send a proclamation throughout Israel, from Beersheba to Dan, calling the people to come to Jerusalem and to celebrate the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel. It had not been celebrated in large numbers according to what was written. At the king's command, the couriers went through Israel and Judah with letters from the king, from his officials, which read, "People of Israel, return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, that he may return to you who are left and who escaped from the land of the king of the Assyria. Do not be like your fathers and brothers who were unfaithful to the Lord, the God of their fathers, that he made them an object of horror, as you see. Do not be stiff-necked as your fathers were. Submit to the Lord and come to the sanctuary where he is consecrated forever. Serve the Lord your God, so that his fierce anger will turn away from you. If you return to the Lord, then your brothers and your children will be shown compassion by their captors and will come back to the land, for the Lord your God is gracious and compassionate. He will not turn his face from you if you return to him." The couriers went from town to town in Ephraim and Manasseh as far as Zebulun, but the people scorned and ridiculed them. Nevertheless, some men of Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun humbled themselves and went to Jerusalem. Also in Judah, the hand of God was on the people to give them unity of mind to carry out what the king and his officials had ordered, following the word of the Lord. A large crowd assembled in Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of the Unleavened Bread in the second month. They removed the altars in Jerusalem and cleared away the incense altars and threw them in the Kidron Valley. They slaughtered the Passover lamb on the 14th day of the second month. The priests and the Levites were ashamed and consecrated themselves and brought burnt offering to the temple of the Lord. Then they took up their regular positions as prescribed in the law of Moses, the man of God. The priest sprinkled blood handed to them by the Levites, since many in the crowd had not consecrated themselves. The Levites had to kill the Passover lambs, for all those were not ceremonially clean and could not consecrate their lambs to the Lord. Although many of the people who came from Ephraim and Manasseh and Issachar and Zebulun had not purified themselves yet, they ate the Passover contrary to what was written. But Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, "May the Lord, who is good, pardon everyone who sets his heart on seeking God, the Lord, the God of his fathers, even if he is not clean according to the rules of the sanctuary." And the Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people. The Israelites who were present in Jerusalem celebrated the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days with great rejoicing, while the Levites and priests sang to the Lord every day, accompanied by the Lord's instruments and praise. Hezekiah spoke encouragingly to all the Levites who showed good understanding of the service of the Lord. For 7 days they ate their assigned portion and offered fellowship offerings and praised the Lord, the God of their fathers. The whole assembly then agreed to celebrate the festival 7 more days. So for another 7 days they celebrated joyfully. Hezekiah, king of Judah, provided 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep and goats for the assembly. And the officials provided them with 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep and goats. The great number of priests consecrated themselves. The entire assembly of Judah rejoiced, along with the priests and Levites, all who had assembled Israel, including the aliens who had just come from Israel and those who lived in Judah. There was a great joy in Jerusalem, for since the days of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem. The priests and the Levites stood and blessed the people, and God heard them, and their prayers reached heaven in his holy dwelling place. When all this ended, the Israelites who were there went out the towns of Judah and smashed the sacred stones and cut down the Asherah poles. They destroyed the high places and the altars throughout Judah and Benjamin and Ephraim and Manasseh. After they had destroyed all of them, the Israelites returned to their own towns and their own property. 31. Contributions for worship. Hezekiah assigned the priests and the Levites to divisions, each of them according to their own duties as priests or Levites, to offer burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, to minister, to give thanks, and to sing praises at the gates of the Lord's dwelling. The king contributed his own possessions for the morning and evening burnt offerings and for the burnt offerings on the Sabbaths. New moons an appointed feast as written at the law of the Lord. He ordered the people living in Jerusalem to give portions due to the priests and Levites, so they could devote themselves to the law of the Lord. As soon as the order went out, the Israelites generously gave first fruits of their grain, new wine, oil, and honey, in all that the fields produced. They brought a great amount, a tithe of everything. The men of Israel and Judah who lived in the town of Judah also brought a tithe of their herds and their flocks, and a tithe of the holy things dedicated to the Lord their God, and they piled them in heaps. They began doing this in the 3rd month and finished the 7th month. When Hezekiah and his officials came and saw the heaps, they praised the Lord and blessed his people. Hezekiah asked the priests and the Levites about the heaps, and Azariah the chief priest from the family of Zadok answered, "Since the people began to bring their contributions to the temple of the Lord, we have had enough to eat and plenty to spare, because the Lord has blessed his people, and this great amount is left over." Hezekiah gave orders to prepare storerooms in the temples of the Lord, and this was done. Then they faithfully brought in contributions, tithes, and dedicated gifts. Hananiah, a Levite, was in charge of these things, and his brother Shemiah was next in rank. Jehiel, Ahaziah, Nathan, Asahel, Jeremoth, and Jozabad, Eliel, Ismachiah, Mahath, and Benahiah were supervisors under the Conaniah and Shimei, his brother, appointed by King Hezekiah, and Azariah, the official in charge of the temple of God. Hor, son of Imnah the Levite, the keeper of the east gate, was in charge of the free will offering given to God, distributing the contributions made to the Lord, and also the consecrated gifts. Eden, Miniamin, Jeshua, and Shemaiah, Amariah, Shechaniah assisted him faithfully in the towns of the priests, distributing to their fellow priests according to their divisions, old and young alike. In addition, they distributed to the males 3 years old or more whose names were in the genealogical records. All who enter the temple of the Lord perform daily duties for their various tasks according to their responsibilities and their divisions. And they distributed to the priests enrolled by their families the genealogical records, and likewise the Levites 20 years old or more according to their responsibilities and their divisions. They included all the little ones, the wives, the sons, the daughters, the whole community listed in the genealogical records, for they were faithful in consecrating themselves. As for the priests, the descendants of Aaron who lived on the farmlands around their towns or in any other towns, men were designated by name to distribute portions to every male among them and to all who are recorded in the genealogies of the Levites. This is what Hezekiah did throughout Judah, doing what is good and right and faithful before the Lord his God. In everything that he undertook in the service of God's temple in obedience to the law and the commands, he sought out his God and worked wholeheartedly, and so he prospered. Okay. All right. So 32. After all that Hezekiah had he faithfully done, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, came and invaded Judah. He laid siege to the fortified cities, thinking to conquer them for himself. When Hezekiah that Sennacherib came and that he intended to make war on Jerusalem, he consulted with his officials and the military staff about blocking off the water from the springs outside the city, and they helped him. A large force of men assembled, and they blocked off the springs and the stream that flowed through the land. Why should the kings of Assyria come and find plenty of water? They said. Then he worked hard repairing all the broken sections of the wall and building towers on it. He built another wall outside that one, and reinforced the supporting terraces of the city of David. He also made large numbers of weapons and shields, and he appointed military officers over the people and assembled them before him in the square at the city gate, and encouraged them with these words: Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of the king of Assyria and the vast army with him. For there is a greater power with us than it is with him. With him is only the arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord of our God to help us and to help fight our battles. And the people gained confidence from what Hezekiah, the king of Judah, said. Later, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, and all his forces were laying siege to Lachish. When he sent his officers to Jerusalem with this message for Hezekiah, the king of Judah, and for all the people who were there, this is what the king of Assyria says: On what are you basing your confidence that you remain in Jerusalem under siege? The Lord, when Hezekiah says, the Lord our God will save us from the hand of the king of Syria, he is misleading you. I remember we read. Do not die. To let you die of hunger and thirst. Sorry. Do not let King Hezekiah himself remove the God's high places and altars, saying to Judah, you must worship before one altar and burn sacrifices on it. Do you not know that what I and my fathers have done to the peoples of other lands? Were the gods of those nations ever able to deliver their land from my hand? Who of all gods of these nations that my fathers destroyed have been able to save his people from me? And so they keep going and going and going, talking about how they did all the other lands bogus and how they were able to take their stuff. So it says his officers continued to speak further against the Lord their God and against his servant Hezekiah. The king also wrote letters of insulting the Lord, the God of Israel, saying to him, just as the gods of the other people in the land did not rescue their people from my hand, so the God of Hezekiah will not rescue his people from my hand. Then they called out in Hebrew to the people of Jerusalem who were on the wall to terrify them and make them afraid in order to capture the city. They spoke about God of Jerusalem as they did about the gods of other people and the work of the men's hands. King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah of Amoz cried out in prayer to heaven about this, and the Lord sent an angel who annihilated all the fighting men and the leaders of the officers and the king of the Assyrian camp. So he withdrew to his own land in disgrace. And when he went to the temple of his God, some of his sons cut him down with the sword. So the Lord saved Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, from the hand of all others, and he took care of them on every side and brought many offerings to Jerusalem for the Lord, and valuable gift for Hezekiah, the king of Judah. From them he was highly regarded by all nations. I haven't written, look at this, y'all. This was in the beginning, right? That was in the beginning when I didn't have to read like 2 a day. This is literally what we've been doing. But that's how much I've been writing now. So I need to write at least something. So I do want to mention, I want to write down the king's name. I want to mention that it says, when Hezekiah was talking to them, it said, don't be afraid, don't be discouraged of the Assyrian king and his vast army, because we have a higher power with us that will fight our battles. Then it goes on to say, they cried out to the Lord and the Lord of the heavens, and the Lord sent an angel who annihilated all the fighting men and the leaders, right? So God literally fought their battle by sending the angel of death amongst the Assyrian people, right? And the leaders, right? So then to make matters worse, when he got back to his homeland, his own sons cut him down. And so just because, so when we read it before, it says like they didn't say anything when the commanders and the the messengers were talking about what the Assyrian king said. King Hezekiah did not say anything. He wasn't going to argue. He wasn't going to defend, because that's something that I wrote down before. And so let God fight your battles for you. Just let him do it for you. You don't got to defend yourself. Just let him fight their battles for you. But also, peep that they started speaking in Hebrew so the people of the land could hear. So he not only was he speaking to he spoke to whoever they were talking to. He was speaking in front of the whole town, but they could not understand him. Then they started speaking in Hebrew so that they could understand, and so that they could scare him. And so one of the tactics that the devil uses is fear. Like, I put that fear is an underrated tactic of the devil, because not a lot of people actually say, like, I'm actually scared. Like, a lot of people want to be the tough one or be the one who's like, I'm not scared of anything, or they're too embarrassed to like admit that they're scared about something. But that's fear in itself. And so we got to be able to recognize when we're fearful, and to understand, like, I don't have to be fearful of nothing, because God is on my side. God will fight my battles, and if it doesn't end up the way that I want, it's for a reason. Okay. We are in verse 24 of chapter 32. It says, Hezekiah's pride, success, and death. In those days, Hezekiah became ill and was at the point of death. He prayed to the Lord, who answered him and gave him a miraculous sign. But Hezekiah's heart was proud, and he did not respond to the kindness shown to him. Therefore, the Lord's wrath was on him and Judah and Jerusalem. Then Hezekiah repented of the pride of his heart, and so did the people of Jerusalem. Therefore, the Lord's wrath did not come upon them during the days of Hezekiah. Hezekiah had very riches and honors, and he made treasuries for his silver and gold, and for his precious stones, spices, shields, and all kinds of valuables. He also made buildings to store the harvest of grain and new wine and oil, and he made stalls for various kinds of cattle and pens for the flocks. He built villages and acquired great numbers of flocks and herds, for God has given him very great riches. It was Hezekiah who blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon spring, and channeled the water to the west side of the city of David, and he succeeded in everything that he undertook. But when envoys were sent by the rulers of Babylon to ask him about the miraculous sign that had occurred in the land, God left him to test him, to know everything that was in his heart. The other events of Hezekiah's reign and his acts of devotion are written in the vision of the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. Hezekiah rested with his fathers and was buried on the hill where the tombs of David's descendants are. All of Judah and the people of Jerusalem honored him when he died, and Manasseh, his son, succeeded him as king. Are written in the vision of the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amoz, in the book of the kings of Judah. Okay. So it says, wait, what's after this? Okay. It says Manasseh, the king of Judah. So he was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 55 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the detestable practice of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had demolished, and he also erected altars to the Baals and made Asherah poles. He bowed to all starry hosts and worshipped them. He built altars in the temple of the Lord, which the Lord said, my name will remain in Jerusalem forever. In both courts of the temple of the Lord, he built altars to all the starry hosts. He sacrificed his sons on the fire of the valley of Ben Hanam, and practiced sorcery, divination, and witchcraft, and consulted in mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, provoking him to anger. He took the carved images that he made and put in the God's temple, of which God said to David and to his son Solomon, in this temple of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. I will not make again the feet of the Israel to leave the land. I will assign to your forefathers, if it has been carefully to do everything I commanded concerning the laws, decrees, and ordinances given through Moses. But Manasseh led Judah and the people of Jerusalem astray, so they did more evil in the eyes of the nations of the Lord, and they destroyed before the Israelites. Okay, I'm going to read the rest of the chapter because we went through this before. Yeah, we definitely read this, but I'm going to read this all out again. It says, the Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they paid no attention. So the Lord brought against him an army, the commander, the king of Assyria, who took Manasseh prisoner and put a hook in his nose and bound him with bronze shackles and took him to Babylon. In his distress, he sought the favor of the Lord the Lord his God, and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. And when he prayed to him, the Lord was moved by his entreaty and listened to his plea. So he brought him back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord is God. Afterward, he rebuilt the outer wall of the city of David and went to Jehon the spring in the valley as far as the entrance of the fish gate and encircling the hill of Ophel. And he also made it much higher. He stationed military commanders in the fortified city of Judah. He got rid of the foreign gods and removed the image from the temple of the Lord, as well as the altar that he built on the temple hill and in Jerusalem. He threw them out of the city. Then he restored the altar of the Lord and sacrificed fellowship offerings and thanks offerings on it, and told Judah to serve the Lord, the God of Israel. The people, however, continued to sacrifice at all high places, but only to the Lord their God. In other events of Manasseh's reign, including his prayer to his God and the words ever to the Spirit, the seer spoke to him in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel, are written in the annals of the kings of Israel. His prayer and how God moved in his entreaty, as well as his sins and unfaithfulness, and the sites where he built the high places and set up Asherah poles and idols before he humbled himself, are all written in the records of the seers. Manasseh rested with his fathers and was buried in his palace, and Amon his son succeeded him as king. Amon, king of Judah. He was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 2 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, as his father Manasseh had done, and he worshipped and offered sacrifices to all the idols that Manasseh made. But unlike his father, he did not humble himself before the Lord, and he increased in his guilt. His officials conspired against him and assassinated him in his palace. Then the people of the land killed all those who plotted against King Amon and made Josiah, his son, king in his place. Josiah was 8 years old when he became the king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and walked in the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or to the left. While he was still young, he began to seek the Lord, seek the Lord of his father David. In the 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of high places of Asherah poles, carved idols, and cast images. Under his direction, the altar of Baals were torn down. He cut to pieces the incense altars that were above them and smashed the Asherah poles and idols in the images. These he broke into pieces and scattered over the graves of those who sacrificed them. He burned the bones of the priests on their altars and so purged Judah and Jerusalem. In the towns of Manasseh, Ephraim, and Simeon, as far as the Naphtali, and in the ruins around them, he tore down the altars and the Asherah poles and crushed idols to powder and cut to pieces all the incense altars throughout Israel. Then he went back to Jerusalem. In the 18th year of Josiah's reign, to purify the land and the temple, he sent Shaphan, son of Azaliah, and Maaseiah, the ruler of the city, with Joah and Joahaz, the recorder, to repair the temple of the Lord his God. They went to Hilkiah, the high priest, and gave him money that had been brought to the temple of God, which the Levites were the doorkeepers and collected from the people of Manasseh, Ephraim, and the entire remnant of Israel, and from the people of Judah and Benjamin and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Then they entrusted it to the men appointed to supervise the work of the Lord's temple. They paid these men who repaired to repair and restore the temple. And then we all know they gave them money, they gave the carpenters money, they paid for all the stuff. Boom. They worked faithfully. Boom. So the book of the law was found. While they were bringing out the money of what had been taken into the temple of the Lord, Hilkiah the priest found the book of the law that the Lord had been given through Moses. Hilkiah said to Shaphan the secretary, I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord, and he gave it to Shaphan. Shaphan took the book to the king and reported to him, your officials are doing everything that has been committed to him. They paid out the money that was in the temple of the Lord and trusted to the supervisors and the workers. Shaphan, the secretary, informed the king, Hilkiah the priest gave me a book. And Shaphan read it in front of the presence of the king. Then the king heard the words of the law and tore his robes. He gave these orders, go and inquire the Lord for me, for the remnant of in Israel and Judah, what is written in the book that has been found. Great is the Lord's anger that is poured out on us, because our fathers had not kept the word of the Lord, and they have not acted in accordance that is written in the book. So they went to speak to the prophetess Huldah, and she says to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Tell the men who sent you to me, this is what the Lord says. I'm going to bring disaster on this place and its people, all the curses written in the book that has been read in the presence of the king of Judah, because they have forsaken me and burned incense to other gods and provoked me to anger. But all the hands that they have made, my anger will be poured out on this place, and it will not be quenched. Tell the king of Judah, who sent you to inquire of the Lord, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says concerning the words that you hear. Because your heart was so responsive and you humbled yourself before God when you heard what he spoke against his place and his people, and because you humbled yourself before me and tore your robes and wept in my presence, I have heard you, declared the Lord. Now I will gather you to your fathers, and you will be buried in peace. Your eyes will not see the disaster that I'm going to bring on this place and on those who live there." So they took her hand, back to the king, and the king called together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. He went up to the temple of the Lord with the men of Judah and the people of Jerusalem and the priests and the Levites and all the people from the least to the greatest. He read in their hearing all the book of the covenant which had been found in the temple of the Lord. The king stood by his pillar and renewed the covenant in the presence of the Lord, to follow the Lord and keep his commands, regulations, and decrees with all his heart and all his soul, and to obey the words of the covenant written in the book. Then he had everyone in Jerusalem and Benjamin pledge themselves to it, and the people of Jerusalem did this in accordance to the covenant of God and the God of their fathers. Josiah removed all the detestable idols from the territory belonging to the Israelites, and that he had all who were present in Israel serve the Lord their God as long as he lived, and they did not fail to follow the Lord, the God of their fathers. Boom. Josiah celebrates the Passover. Josiah celebrated the Passover to the Lord in Jerusalem, and the Passover of the lamb was slaughtered on the 14th day of the first month. He appointed the priests their duties and encouraged them in the service of the Lord's temple. He said to the Levites who instructed all Israel who had been consecrated to the Lord, put the sacred ark in the temple that Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, built. It is not to be carried about on your shoulders. Now serve the Lord your God and his people Israel. Prepare yourself by families and your divisions, according to the directions written by David, king of Israel, and by his son Solomon. Stand in the holy place with the groups of Levites for each subdivision and the families of your fellow countrymen, the lay people. Slaughter the Passover lambs, consecrate yourself, and prepare the lambs for your fellow countrymen, doing what the Lord commanded Moses. Josiah provided for all the lay people who were total of 30,000 sheep and goats for the Passover offerings, and also 3,000 cattle, all from the king's own possessions. His officials also contributed voluntarily to the people and the priests of the Levites. Hilkiah, Zechariah, Jehiel, and the administrators of God's temple gave the priests 2,600 Passover offerings and 300 cattle. Also, Conaniah, along with Shemaiah and Nathanael, his brothers, and Hashabiah, Jael, and Josabeth, the leaders of the Levites, provided 5,000 Passover offerings and 500 head of cattle for the Levites. The service was arranged, and the priests stood in their places with the Levites in their divisions, as the king had ordered. The Passover lambs were slaughtered, and the priests sprinkled the blood handed to them, while the Levites skinned animals. They set aside the burnt offerings to give to the subdivisions of the families of the people to offer the Lord. It is written in the book of Moses. They did the same with the cattle. They roasted the Passover animals over fire as prescribed, and boiled the holy offerings in pots, cauldrons, and pans, and served them quickly to all the people. After this, they made preparations for themselves. As for the priests, because the priests, the descendants of Aaron, were sacrificing the burnt offerings and the fat portions until nightfall, so the Levites made preparations for themselves and Aaron and for the Aaronic priests. The musicians, the descendants of Asaph, were in the places prescribed by David, Asaph, Haman, and Jeduthun, the king's seer. The gatekeepers at each gate did not need to leave their post because their fellow Levites made preparations for them. So at that time, the entire service of the Lord was carried out for the celebration of the Passover, with the offerings of burnt offerings on the altar of the Lord, and King Josiah had ordered. The Israelites who were present celebrated the Passover at the time and observed the feast of the unleavened bread for 7 days. The Passover had not been observed like this in Israel since the days of the prophet Samuel, and none of the kings of Israel had ever celebrated such a Passover as Josiah, with the priests and the Levites and all Judah and Israel who were there with the people of Jerusalem. This Passover was celebrated in the 18th year of Josiah's reign. The death of Josiah. After all this, when Josiah had set the temple in order, Necho, the king of Egypt, went up to fight Karshemish on the Euphrates, and Josiah marched out to meet him in battle. But Necho sent messengers saying to him, "What quarrel is there between me and you, O king of Judah? It is not you that I am attacking this time, but the house on which I am at war. God has told me to hurry, so stop opposing God who is with me, or he will destroy you." Josiah, however, did not turn away from him, but disguised himself to engage him in battle. He would not listen to what Necho had said at God's command, but went to fight him on the plain of Megiddo. Archers shot King Josiah, and he told his officers, "Take me away, I am badly wounded." So they took him out of his chariot and put him in another chariot, which had brought him to Jerusalem, where he died. He was buried in the tombs of his fathers, and all of Judah and Jerusalem mourned for him. Jeremiah composed laments for Josiah, and to this day all the men and women singers commemorate Josiah in the laments. These became tradition in Israel and are written in the laments. And other events of Josiah's reign and his acts of devotion, according to what is written in the law of the Lord, and all events from the beginning to the end are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and made him king of Jerusalem in the place of his father. Boom. So that's that. So next, I know we read all of that, which is fine. It is what it is. But okay, I think we're about to get into Ezra. So I think I think the next reading will be stuff that we haven't read before. So that's great. So I will be back. I'm going to be back. Okay. I'm going to be back in a couple hours, 3-4 hours, whatever. And then we're going to read again. So I will see y'all later. And y'all have a good day. And I'll see y'all around 12, 1-ish.